So I didn't go after the fashion show. Kind of just happened. Corto was invited to come. I had the Chances Grant that was about garments. I was invited to participate, and so I'd never created work to be presented in that context. So it was an opportunity for me to try it out. Work with textiles started to become more about vulnerability. So I started off as a painter, and I never could stay within the rectangle. So it became funny in my undergraduate years that I didn't know when to stop when I made a painting. So I'd make 50 paintings because I couldn't resolve them. Then all of a sudden I went into printmaking, and printmaking slowed me down. Because at that time you would put one color on top of the other. There's a real sense of repetition and it becomes kind of a meditation. And over the course of making the work, there's a lot going on in one's mind. So the issue of journaling has also been really prominent, and it's a way to get outside of yourself, and whatever you're thinking about becomes something larger than it is. So I decided to embed it more in the work. And it's not that people could read it, but the work became more personal. But as a result also of the pandemic, I think people started to become more honest, and the issue of sharing one's story is very prominent today, and it also is a way to build relationships. And so I've always had people work with me in my studio. All these conversations that we would have, I always kept them, and I would say it was an undercurrent in the work. I think in a way because I didn't think that, should I share, we would talk life stories, right? Should I share those stories or not? Or were they private or not? Buffer their illness or fragility. It's all about that. We don't ever think about hospital gowns. It's just something we throw on over our bodies so people don't see us naked. And so my designing hospital gowns was in a way to bring something that we never thought of into somewhat of, if you want to call it fashionable, put it this way. When a doctor walks into a room with a patient, when a patient is in a medical facility, there's nothing to buffer their illness or fragility. It's all about that. But as we know, when we wear a garment, and it is somewhat fashionable, there's first that it's like a second skin, yet it's also kind of a barrier, or at least it gives people an opportunity to see something more upbeat before they start talking about what's wrong. So again, this work with textiles started to become more about vulnerability, and also became sort of like a good fit. The nature of my work also is that I make miles of yardage. I had never sewn before, and that also is in my work, I find something that speaks to me, but that doesn't mean I know how I'm going to work with it. So I got a sewing machine. I made digital prints that were inspired from the cosmetic sponges and their forms. And because I didn't know how to sew, I would develop digital imagery, send it to be produced, and the textiles would come back, and I started to cut them into strips and sew them together in a way so that nobody would know that I couldn't sew. So as I was teaching myself, I also started to really like the glitches that would happen because I didn't know how to sew one-of-a-kind objects. Please know that recovery. It's been since like the 1990s that I ever did a performative piece with a dancer and a musician, and I used to say that that was one of the hardest things I had ever done. That might not be so anymore, but it was difficult, and I started to think about how would the invitation read. And interestingly enough, it was like the idea of we're invited into life, and what are we going to write as our invitation to participate? as I thought about that and what fashion, the intersection of fashion and performance, I wanted to create a distinction between fashion possibly as spectacle, but I wanted the work to also be participatory. It wasn't about my just designing decorative or embellished pieces of clothing. I wanted the patients or the participants to have their hand in it. So I thought by taking this issue of journaling or doodling or having the patients participate could become part of the garment, and could be an intersection of their thinking with mine. And so it would become a reversible garment, and their journaling, we would zip into the lining of what I first developed, so that the title of this project is Wearing the Inside Out. So it was a way to wear that vulnerability on the outside if you wanted. So all art in the culture of care is an expression that evolved over the past several years. Again, I believe like the pandemic has influenced all of this, and as well as what's going on in our culture right now, it's a period of real, instability. I think feeling vulnerable, and they don't have to be in a hospital situation. The other thing is, like I mentioned, art and artists usually sit on the outside of everyday life. And this is a way to bring art into a more experiential, it's more experiential in nature. And so it is about educating and letting people see that creativity has a place in daily life. Creativity is different than making art, but the thing about art and the difference between art and craft and creativity, I think that art is kind of bigger than itself, and it speaks in a way to issues that are larger. And there's a big gap between what people think is art and that they don't understand it.